Welcome back, everybody. This is Darreck Kirby, and this is the Dallas Prospect. We are running it back here again today as I am slightly off frame. Wait for it. I am a professional YouTuber. No, not yet. Yeah, I can live with that. We are running it back because yesterday's show, while informative, was not my best, and I settle for nothing less than my best. That is how I live my life. That is how I try to provide the best service I can to you guys, whether it's having conversations, engaging in active conversations, informing, entertaining, whatever. I want to make sure that I've got my fastball locked down tight. Is that confusing to use a baseball analogy in those circumstances? You bet it is. But I'm doing it anyway because it's pretty much ingrained into my mind to use that analogy here. So we are moving on today into another topic that I almost covered in yesterday's show, but I didn't get a chance to add it in before we went live, and I was working, as I said, on a pretty condensed schedule yesterday. We are talking about, finally, the comments of Luka Doncic on the hiring of Jason Kidd as the Mavericks coach. Now, this happened months ago that Kidd was hired. Not that Luka commented. It's been a minute. Luka was over preparing with Slovenia for their Olympic run. They're pretty much rushed to within a fingertip from Nicholas Batum of playing in the gold medal game. And now, after all this time, after the Olympic run itself, after signing his new 5-year, $200+ million Supermax, after building some basketball courts in his home country, Slovenia, revitalizing, revamping, remastering, however you want to say it, his childhood courts that he learned to play the game on, which we'll get to a little bit in a minute, he has finally commented on his new head coach. This is a piece on the Smoking Cuban. No, I did not write it. This comes from Tyler Watts. He is the expert at the Smoking Cuban. And this is working off of his article here, basically talking about Luka's perception of Jason Kidd. Now, I've got a little paraphrased excerpt of it there. You'd think after all this time I would learn what direction I need to point on the graphic, but I don't, because the monitor I have OBS on is to my right, but I need to point to my left to make my fingers actually look like they're pointing toward it. I could fix this simply, but at this point I'm too set in my ways. So let's run the full quote here. This is Luka talking about Jason Kidd. Quote, "I think he's an excellent coach who knows a lot about how to play basketball and how to lead a team. It is an excellent opportunity for me to grow, and I think it will help me a lot." Now, Jason Kidd, he's had some up and downs as coaches. Coach. Had some ups, had some downs. We've talked about some of these before. The Giannis biography kind of painted some concerning image things, some very old school coaching mentality, which is not always wrong. For instance, I think Tyson Chandler has an old school basketball mentality to him as well. And perhaps just because we haven't seen him as a coach before, we haven't really had an opportunity to see how that's instilled in him. But with modern basketball, say what you want about, the players are getting weaker mentally than ever before. I disagree. I just think the things have evolved and moved past the drill sergeant mentality, and you couldn't really do that with as much success today. And I think that's part of why Kidd kind of trailed off towards the end of his coaching run with Milwaukee after it already didn't work out in Brooklyn, and now he kind of rebuilt his image with the Lakers the past couple of years. So there's some ups and downs to consider when looking at Jason Kidd. I'm willing to say that he's probably grown a bit as a coach in terms of understanding what he can and can't do, how he has to approach things, how he has to try to connect with his players. You can't just go with this psychological warfare and assume that you're going to keep a team. And if he wants an example of that beyond his own experience, he should probably look no further than his predecessor here in Dallas, Rick Carlisle. Now, Carlisle over the years did start to scale back. I think Carlisle probably realized somewhere around 2013, 2014 that really old school hard-nosed approach was starting to lose some of those teams. And he had to start having team-only meetings, private closed-door meetings, things like that with the team, and kind of learning where he had to cede some of that power and change his approach. And I think by the time Luka got here, it just became apparent, like crystal clear. This kid is so special. I have to make sure I'm getting everything out of him, out of the team possible, because if I don't get along with him, he's not going anywhere. I would be the one having to leave. And I think the way Rick's departure worked out, whether you want to say it was just a protest resignation almost because of what happened with Donnie Nelson, which I'm not saying there's nothing to that. I, in fact, believe there probably is something to that. I think that's probably what sparked the meeting that led to the reevaluation of the fit. But I think it's also true that Rick wasn't able to reach Luka and some of these younger guys on the team the way that you really need to. Why? Because look across the Mavericks roster. How many of these guys commented on Rick being let go? How many of them came out and said that they were disappointed to see that Rick is gone or thank him for everything he's done for them? I think there might, and I couldn't even tell you off the top of my head who, there might have been one guy that said something. And it wasn't Luka, it wasn't KP, it wasn't anybody of note to my knowledge. Wasn't none of these young guys. Tyrell Terry, Josh Green. By all means, in the comments, if you know who it is, let me know. I don't think anybody commented thanking Rick or commented on him helping them grow throughout their career. That says something to me. And that's me acknowledging part of me loves Rick Carlisle simply for what he did for this franchise in the past. You say what you want about him losing his finger on the pulse of this franchise. I don't disagree with you, but I know what he did in the past and how crucial that was, and a big part of 2011, of all things having to finally come together for that one run. Rick Carlisle was instrumental in that. But I digress. Kid needs to look at Carlisle as an example of why he has to scale back. Now, as an assistant, I think that was a little bit more natural for him to do, because you're not the one in total control. You have influence and you have, some authority, but you're kind of forced to step back a little bit. And as a result, I think he was probably able to not just observe on a very talented coaching staff with the Lakers, not just observe what does and does not work, but kind of build that connection while back a step to kind of reevaluate things, form these relationships with these players where suddenly they like him more and they're willing to give their all for him, if, for whatever that means, whatever he's called upon to do for them. They want to work and try their best for him. Towards the end with Milwaukee, that was not the case. Whether it's Larry Saunders abruptly retiring after Kidd basically just completely mentally shattered him, made him just utterly depressed and quit basketball altogether, despite being a pretty nice player. Whatever it is, I think Kidd has probably been forced to reevaluate and grow, and that's good. So I'm glad that Luka understands the basketball mind here. There is very much truth to Kidd's greatness as a player. For the first, good Lord, 15-something years of his career, he was nicknamed Asen because he had no J. Now, he did rebuild a respectable three-point shot in Dallas, working with Dirk, and he was a capable three-point shooter, catch-and-shoot three-point shooter by the end of his career. But man, oh man, the dude was... He had eyes in the back of his head. He could make the ridiculous passes. He understood who to get the ball to, how, when, and where, and was very good at managing a game. He was the consummate floor general. And for several years there, he was the best point guard in the NBA. Even when Nash broke out in Phoenix and won back-to-back MVPs, that pretty much brought it to an even discussion. I think people at that time would have probably said Nash had surpassed Kidd, but there was a lot of truth to Kidd owning the NBA designation as best point guard in the league for about a decade. And yeah, that basketball mind, the IQ doesn't go away. It's just a matter of can he now convert it to actually develop these guys, help his team. His answer, as he said in his introductory press conference, his job is to give Luka the answers to the test, which sounds like a bad phrase because not only does that imply, like if you actually look through the logic of the analogy, it's like not only does that sound like you're basically saying, oh, you're in school and we're cheating on the exam. That sounds like it doesn't allow Luka to actually study and learn. But the idea he's trying to say is I'm trying to teach him. I'm basically trying to tutor him so that he sees everything there is. And so he knows what's coming at him as if he knew the answers on the test to begin with. And then it's not even hard because he doesn't even have to like try because it's so second nature. I get what he's going for. I think that analogy was a little bit flubbed, but even still, I think the understanding is there. He's also trying to give the proper credit to Luka to basically say, look, this kid is so special. He's going to be great whether or not I'm here. My job is basically to help him be even greater if I can, but most importantly, just don't get in the way. Don't inhibit or block his growth and progress. That's the main thing for Jason Kidd. So the basketball mind is there. And this is a good example as well as now I'm going to pivot off into a tangent here. An example of sometimes you can have a guy who is an all-time great, but isn't necessarily a good teacher, even if they are very savvy and understand the logic and the psychology of their craft. An example of this to pivot to professional wrestling would be Shawn Michaels. Shawn Michaels, one of the all-time best in-ring performers ever. Say what you want about him in the 90s and just what an utter dumpster fire his personal life was with, drug and alcohol problems and all of that. Backstage politics, blah, blah, blah. The point is, in the ring, he was one of the all-time greats, unquestioned greats. When he retired, 98 was when he retired, but when he had to step away completely around 2000, 2001 because of his personal problems, he tried to basically have his own wrestling school, and he wasn't able to do a whole lot of hands-on instruction with the talent because certain things, even though he fully understood the psychology of it, and even though he knew the ins and outs of the craft, things came naturally to him that didn't come naturally to the guys coming through the school. And he didn't have the patience or the ability to meet them at their level and then kind of guide them to where he was, to his level. And so, an example like a current guy, Brian Danielson, if you saw his AEW debut, that's his real name also. He went through Shawn Michaels wrestling school. And so some people try to say like, oh, Shawn Michaels mentored Daniel Bryan. Like, Daniel Bryan was there, but their actual work together was very negligible from all reports. So the point of that analogy, that segue, if you will, is to say Jason Kidd is an all-time great. He's achieved at a very high level, but certain guys either see things or they don't. They either have the ability to then make the play, even if they see it. Do they have the ability to make the play? They do or they don't. Luka has that ability. In fact, I think he has that ability at a higher level than Kidd had it, arguably. Kidd in his absolute prime might have been able to match most of the passes and angles and vision that you see from Luka. But where I think Kidd is better, and this is where Luka needs to grow. And I say that very carefully, defensively saying, I'm not trying to be bagging on Luka here. I'm trying to say I think what Luka needs to learn better is how to get the ball to his teammates in their exact spots. We can talk about how KP regressed last year. We can talk about how he was horrifically misused. Yes, he did everything that was asked of him, but what he was being asked to do was pretty much a failed mission from the start. We can talk about all of those things. There's not an argument there. But Luka needs to know how to get KP the ball, where he wants it, when he wants it, how he wants it. Kidd, even at 38 years old when Dallas won the title, oldest starting player in NBA history to win an NBA championship, by the way, and by a long shot. I think the next closest was 34. I'm talking about like not starter to win, because obviously Tim Duncan with the Spurs. I should clarify that. Point guard. Oldest starting point guard. Oldest starting player, period, I believe. Maybe Duncan's last one past that, but I digress. We're off in the wilderness again. The point is that Kidd, even at 38 years old, even though he joked that he could only really run three-point line to three-point line, he couldn't weave through the defense and make all these crazy passes anymore, he controlled games. He understood, I don't have to put up 20 points, 14 assists, and things like that. And by no means am I advocating for Luka to do lesser than he's doing. I'm not saying, hey, instead of scoring 25, 30 points a game, how about like 18 and 12 assists? I'm not advocating for that. My point is, Kidd understood, hey, I can control a game even with a stat line that looks like, and again, not what I'm advocating for, even with a stat line that looks like 8 points, 9 assists, 8 rebounds, and 3 steals. He was able to control games even with that. And that's a lot. I mean, that's also his defensive efforts as well. But that's really impressive when you can control the feel and vibe and tempo of a game, even with numbers that, while nice, you don't look at that and say, like, yeah, that's the best player on our team. And he wasn't at that point. But the point is to say how to control a game in that regard. Now, Luka, damn it, in that regard, you're so in my head, it drives me crazy. Luka knows how to do that. If his shot's not falling, you'll see Luka put up 14, 15, 16 assist games. That's incredible. That's great. But there's got to be other areas, too, where you can continue rounding out in your development. And that's knowing not just how to drive and kick to get guys open threes, but like Dirk. Dirk is not a guy you would drive and kick for an open three 8 times a game. Could he take 8 threes in a game? Sure. But Dirk had his spots in the high post and the low post, elbow extended. He had his areas in which he worked. And if you look by the years, I wish I had the chart in front of me. If I had thought about it this point, although I didn't know I was going to make this point, if I had thought about it before the show, I would have grabbed the graphic. Somebody on Twitter did a great graphic where it's basically looking back all the way to, I think it's to 2000. And it tells you since 2000, not the most field goals made, not the most points made, the most efficient scorers from every region of the offensive side, right? Like inside the paint, like inside the arc, inside the paint, all the different regions outside the three-point line. Dirk owns that list. He is the only player that appears like 4 or 5 times. Everything inside the arc, basically, other than like the paint itself, is Dirk in terms of most efficient, dating back to like 2000. Kidd got Dirk the ball where he wanted it, where he needed it. Now, yes, their stint together was 2008 to 2012, but even still, Kidd knew how to maximize what Dirk could do. And if you look at what the Mavericks' success was without Kidd, post Steve Nash especially, but without Kidd, it was not good. They could not put it all together. They could not get over the hump for a deep playoff run. It wasn't until that 2011 team where a lot of times in the face of overwhelming adversity, they went to Kidd, he went to Dirk and got him the ball right where he wanted and basically said, all right, go to work, big fella. And he took care of it. Now, I understand with Luka being the best player on the Mavericks, whereas Kidd was not the best player on the Mavericks, you might look at that and say, well, no, I want Luka taking over in that moment. That's fine. The point is to say there are going to be moments when you got to know how to get the guy the ball where he wants it. And I think Luka does that pretty well, but I think there's also that gear that needs to switch a little bit for him to consistently feed them. Like, if you look back to the mythical, unicorn, that is Bubble KP, was, hopefully will be again, Bubble KP, you see a guy who could absolutely go on tears. A guy who could come down, splash 3 consecutive threes, and dunk on you. Like, he had scoring bursts in the bubble prior to the playoffs, against Portland in particular. He had like a 14-point first quarter. And then in the second quarter, got like 1 shot not until like the final 5 minutes of the quarter. And you're like, dude was red hot in the first quarter. Why didn't you get him the ball earlier? That's a valid question. Goes off in the third quarter. Same thing. Like 12 points in the third quarter. You're like, dude, this dude's on fire. He got it back. All right, let's go. And then in the fourth quarter, he doesn't get a final shot until over halfway through the quarter. And it's just like, you can't be feast, famine, and then let it happen again in the same game. And I'm not putting that on just Luka. I'm putting that on everybody, on Rick, the offense, anyone who's controlling the ball at the time. Because there were stretches in that game too where Luka wouldn't even be in, and KP would be on the floor and still not getting the ball. That can't happen. If you got a guy who's cooking, feed him. Feed him, feed him, feed him until he's so full he can't get up and down the court. That sounds like a negative thing. So kind of like Kid with his give him the answers to the test ahead of time analogy. I've made a bad analogy now. And so maybe I can empathize with how easy that is to do. But even still, the idea is you want to get the guy the ball, especially when he's cooking, in his preferred spots when he needs the ball. That's the main thing. Drive and kick for open threes, that's great. But as we've seen in recent years, really with the Mavericks, they've been up and down in terms of their ability to complete like those plays. Like Luka might get the great look for the guy, but they got to knock down the shots. And last year really wasn't really there. Like you look at that last game, game 7, you definitely saw it. Non-Luka Doncic three-point attempts were like 5 of 25 in the game. And Luka was getting wide open looks for these guys. He was attracting all the attention because he was the only one doing a damn thing at all. But the problem is when nobody's hitting, it's kind of like, that's where you need to look at it and say like, all right, I know that that's a good look and we're going to live and die by the three in the modern NBA, but maybe we should look at this and say, you know what, let's try and get KP around the elbow. Let's try and get him one of those looks. Now, KP at that point was probably so broken down and just, worn down mentally and physically just by whether it's his physical impediments or just what had been done psychologically to how he was being utilized and how he was having to shoulder all of this unjust blame and everything from fans, from media, etc. If that's the case, maybe it wouldn't have gone anywhere anyway, but I feel like that's a counter that you have to understand. Like, okay, these are good looks, but is it a good look if they're not hitting? Now, is KP still on the team? Yes, KP is still on the team. KP is still on the Mavericks. Ben Price, what up? Freedom Roar. Been a while since I caught you live. Appreciate you. Matt Caldwell, what's good? First in the house. ADP, what's good? I just asked you what's good before reading the rest of your comment. So what's good is good and good enough for me. We are basically talking here about Jason Kidd as a coach and a little bit as a player. Luka Doncic, him commenting on Kidd, basically expressing optimism, heaping some praise on Kidd as a leader, as a coach, and all of that. And we're talking a little bit as well about the Mavericks moving forward and kind of how they need to adjust things. Really couldn't care how many shots KP gets if his defense doesn't improve. Well, if his defense doesn't improve, you should care about his offensive production picking up a little bit. Like, if his defense doesn't improve, you better at the very least hope his offensive game rounds back into form so he can at least offset some of the damage he's giving up. But yes, I agree. If his defense regresses or stays like it was this year, which was already really badly regressed, you've got bigger problems. As for whether or not I still believe in KP and his potential, I'm willing to give the experiment one more year. And here's why. New coaching staff, almost completely new. Like, there are some people still there. Like, if you have like a Sham God and all that, you have some of those assistants there, Daryl Armstrong. But for the most part, it's an entirely new coaching staff. And they understand KP has no value and is not playing up to the contract he's given right now, being utilized the way he was being utilized towards the end of Carlisle's tenure. So if we're either going to, even if we're in the mindset of, hey, we're not married to this idea long term, we're just going to try and rebuild some of the value. Okay, great, but you got to rebuild it a little bit. So between the new coaching staff and the understanding of, hey, if we're going to get anything close to what we thought we were going to get out of this and go anywhere near, especially now, right? The fact that they couldn't get a tried and true number 2 scorer like they said was their top priority in free agency tells you, all right, well, now they have no choice. Now they have to hope that KP can rise back up to that form he was before the meniscus tear and play at that level. Because if he doesn't, then we're in a whole different world of trouble, even beyond just KP himself. So you want to rebuild his value? Great. You got to have him play like a number 2 player, like a number 2 scorer on this team. And the new coaching staff gives you reason for that. Also, the fact, we've said it a million times, it feels like, but it still bears mentioning. It's his first healthy offseason in like 4 years. The first time he hasn't been rehabbing from something. He actually has time this offseason. Granted, it's still a little bit of a shorter offseason than traditionally, but it's not nearly as short as the like 7-8 weeks that they had last offseason. So it's an opportunity to get right and actually get in the lab a little bit. You've heard that expression, guys getting in the lab trying to tweak and adjust their game. Dirk was famous for this. He would take a few weeks. As he got older, he took a few weeks. When he was younger, he took no time off. But he'd take a few weeks to kind of give his body some rest, and then he'd be relentlessly in the lab working with Holger, developing new shots, new strengths in terms of working in certain situations to score. And it all finally culminated in that 2011 run, which if you want to look at 2011 Dirk, you might say like that's the absolute apex of his peak. I think that's fair. I don't think it's his best. I think his actually year before was probably his best. I think what we saw was the residual effect of his peak carrying over. But people don't talk about it. In that 2010 playoff series against, and it was the second round against the Nuggets, they got beaten 5, but Dirk averaged like 35 and 10 on like 50-40 shooting, like 50-40-90 shooting splits. He was phenomenal. The problem was defensively, the Mavericks stunk. They didn't have Tyson yet. Jason Kidd could do nothing defensively against speedier guards. Granted, Andre Miller was the point guard there, but you also had like Chauncey Billups. You just had issues there where Kidd couldn't really deal with it. And that's another thing that kind of worked a little bit to Dallas's advantage in 2011 was the matchups they got defensively. Kidd could still lock up more physical, stronger guards. That's why he oftentimes guarded the number 2 guard and not speedier point guards. Like when they played the Thunder, he did not have to check Russell Westbrook hardly. They moved him around to try and minimize his lack of quickness defensively. But if you wanted to bang bodies and you wanted to get physical, Kidd could do that, and he could do it in small stretches against very good players still. Back on to the point about Dirk. He would work relentlessly and evolve his game, add something new to it, refine skills he already had. And pretty much every year he came back with at least 1 or 2 little, sometimes not so little, sometimes like significant additions to the game. The one-legged fadeaway, the spin into the fade, was a fairly recent addition before that title run. And it was something he did every now and then, but it became like his go-to move in that year. So that's an example. That's the kind of thing KP just has not had the opportunity to do. KP, when he came into the league, just the existence of who he was and what he could do made him a unicorn. And that's why people called him a unicorn. Kevin Durant was the one who gave him the nickname. But it wasn't until he actually learned how to evolve his game, Dirk, that is, that he became just truly great. It wasn't just, hey, I'm a 7-footer who can shoot threes and has some pretty good mobility for my size. No, he had to evolve all this game, including eventually a low post game, which he desperately needed. KP, because he's had the injuries throughout his career, has not had a lot of opportunity to do that, especially in the last couple of years. So, as he said in his exit interview, KP, this is finally an opportunity for him to get back in the lab and hone and develop his game, evolve his game in a way he hasn't had the opportunity to do. The rest of the league caught up. More guys can deal with KP and what he already brought to the table. He's not anymore a unicorn. Now, he has to get back in the lab and continue to evolve to find new things he can do that make him either just better or new things that make him that much harder to guard so that he can kind of reclaim that status. Because right now, he's still a fairly rare feature, but he's not a unicorn. A unicorn is like the thing that's like, dude, I didn't even know this was real. If there's one out there, it's literally one. Like, there's nothing like this. This is so surreal. It's almost supernatural. That's not what the case is anymore, though. Now you're looking at matchups pretty regularly where guys are like, yeah, they got a guy that can handle KP pretty well, actually. Or guys who can do what he does. Karl Anthony Towns, great example. He's a better outside shooter than KP. Now, he still has defensive liabilities, but he's a better weapon. So if KP's a unicorn, what does that make Cat? All fair questions. But the point isn't that he has to be better than Karl Anthony Towns. The point is just that he has to continue progressing his game, developing and fine-tuning it so that he can be the best version of himself he can be. As long as he can be a capable number 2 scorer every night or most every night for Luka, then we can have a conversation like about him recouping his value and what that means. But right now, I don't know. I'm hopeful, but if it doesn't work this year, I don't think that there's any more reason to continue being optimistic, because at that point, he's 3 years through a 5-year deal, and especially if he has any more injury setbacks, like significant ones that require surgery, be it the offseason or midseason, I think at that point you have to really consider whether it's just time to let it go. So, yes, as we were saying, it's an interesting situation. I'm still willing to believe. We believe. We believe. Go team. Yay. But it's a very stacked deck here that they're going to have to figure out how to manage. Because, yeah, KP, I think he's better than what we even got to see last year. I think he kind of became resigned to the limitations imparted on him. Some of that was very real and came from him, but I also think part of it was, hey, this seems like the most low-risk thing we can do to still get something out of him and not risk losing him to an injury. And by the end, the way they were utilizing him, you could almost argue they should have just let him, like, not let him get hurt, obviously, but, like, negated him to a point where, and that wouldn't have been good for him either. So that's the psychological part you have to manage. But I don't know, man. It's complicated. The point of all of this, I'm glad Luka, who before Kidd was even announced as a Mavericks candidate, let alone coach. This is when Luka was a rookie, I believe, when he was going to partake in the U.S. versus World, rookie sophomore type challenge at the All-Star weekend. He talked with Kidd a little bit there and expressed admiration for his basketball mind and, his status as an all-time great. So the respect was already there. It's now just a matter of, can Kidd show this growth, and can these two form a better relationship than Luka and Rick had? Now, if you hear Kidd talk about trying to sound like he's connecting to younger players, it's a little concerning. Like Kidd's introductory press conference, I think it was intended as a joke, but it landed so poorly, it really is hard to say. He basically was like, well, these young kids, they got these new ways of communicating. And you're sitting there as a fan or as a media member, and you're like, oh, he's going to talk about like Snapchat or Instagram or, at least Facebook or something, right? He's going to talk about something like this. He's like, Kidd's like, oh, they got this thing they do called text messaging. And that's how they communicate. So I've been learning how to text message so that I can actually communicate with them. That's the worst Jason Kidd impression ever. I just wanted to portray like an old out-of-touch nerd, which, I mean, for real, once I get about 10 more years down the road, won't be that hard anyway, because I will be one. But even still with Kidd, it's like, dude, text messaging has been around since at least the late 90s. At least the late 90s. I mean, like, mainstream. Like, you can talk about, like, cell phones blowing up around 2000 or whatever, but, like, as an NBA player, you definitely sent text messages throughout your playing career. Like, you're going to lead me to believe you weren't doing text messages when you were on the title team in 2011? All right. Again, I'm going to take your word that it's not even your word. I'm going to take the assumption for your benefit that you're joking because oofa, if you can't understand or reach a player on that level, just understanding the means through which they communicate and you're that out of touch with their culture, then you're going to not be very long for the coaching world in all likelihood, unless you can be like an all-time great coach of some respect, be it like going football route, a Belichick or a Nick Saban. They don't have to connect with the younger groups. Their old school mentality and greatness allows them to get away with it because they keep winning titles. And as long as you're winning titles, people will deal with the tyrant. People will deal with the psychological warfare. But when I think Kidd has like a losing coaching record overall. When you're doing that and struggling just to make the playoffs, they're going to look at that and be like, bro, who are you? Who are you getting in my face and trying to like run me till I puke, acting like you're some great coach or something? Like, you lose a team. He lost Milwaukee. Giannis still has high respect for him and credits him with his own development, and that's great. That's very promising for Kidd. Like, for us having Kidd as a coach, that's promising to hear. But not everybody responds to that. That old school mentality was like, hey, I treat everybody exactly the same. Here in Dallas, Jimmy Johnson, perfect example. The claim was, I treat everybody the same. I don't give anybody special treatment. Emmitt Smith, in a practice early on with the Cowboys, it might have been in his first couple years, but he was getting full of himself at practice. This is a story that gets passed around every now and then. He was getting full of himself at practice. Jimmy straight up told the offensive line to not block for him, like not for Emmitt to hear, but to not block for him on the next play. He got smacked. The defense smacked him, and the idea he was trying to send was like, see, nobody's above this. But here's the difference. Jimmy would cut players, trade players, whatever, when they were lower on the totem pole and made mistakes. That would never apply to Emmitt Smith. The worst he was willing to do was let Emmitt get one tepid tackle in practice to try and humble him. It's not the same. You can't treat everybody with a sweeping brush, and you can't pretend that you're going to. And it sounds like in Kidd's first stint, that was kind of how he tried to treat it. And some guys are going to rise to that challenge and be great. Giannis, perfect example. Other guys are going to crumble under the pressure, and that's not to be treated as a personal failing. I think you have to understand that, in this case, psychological warfare definitely is not the approach that overwhelmingly works for the team. And even Carlisle had to understand that and scale it back. So make of it what you will. You know, you have the soaring success of like a Giannis, who continued to get better even after Kidd was gone, but who Giannis credits Kidd for his growth and kind of working on the other aspects of his game, not just working about shooting and things like that. And then you're going to have, conversely, like a Larry Saunders, someone who just is completely broken by it, and suddenly the rest of the team sees how you're treating that guy, and they're not willing to go to war for you. You have to be able to connect to your players now, and treating them that way is not a way in the modern game to really do that. Even still, let's see. MT, what's good? Good stream so far. Luka. I gotta take a Luka. Luka needs improvement in terms of bringing his teammates into positions they can create and prefer, as well as KP is not a unicorn anymore. Not even New York KP would not be. Yeah, a lot of those are points that I've already kind of made. But I'm not saying that as a criticism. I don't know how long you've been here. Appreciate you being here all the same. But the idea is simply that the team needs to improve. I'm glad that, and I wouldn't expect, what would you expect Luka to come out and say? Like, oh, yeah, I mean, I guess he's there. What am I going to do? He's the coach. I guess I just got to give it a shot. Like, if that was Luka's comments, you'd be like, I don't know. So I'm not saying this like, breaking news, Luka approves after signing his 5-year Supermax. Like, yeah, no, of course he's going to say that. But I think given what we've observed and heard from Luka talking about Kidd in the past, I think, and part of that's not even just like on camera in an interview where he's asked directly about it. Some of that's just people like observing their interactions at like that All-Star weekend. I think you can ascertain that there is a mutual healthy respect there. And Luka, especially for how long it took him to finally comment on it, he's had time to talk to different guys. He's had time to not just observe other guys talking about it, whether it was Damian Lillard initially basically saying he wanted Kid in Portland, whether it was Giannis winning a title and then praising Kid in his post-game press conference after clinching the title, whether it was LeBron lamenting losing Kid as a coach because of how much he valued him on that staff. Like, you look at these different things, Luka sees and hears all of that, and he has time to talk to other guys that that he knows within the league and kind of pick their brains a little bit. And he kind of probably sees, like, okay, so the things that were concerning, we'll have to see. But it sounds like overall this is a very positive move that's being well received, not just in Dallas by some of the guys here on the team already, but in general, in a broader scope. There's a healthy respect throughout the league and organizations about Kid. So, okay, cool. Cool. Let's see how this works out, because it's going to be like, now that Luka's on his new deal, which, by the way, he's got this next year that he still plays out on the previous cap figure from his existing deal. And so it doesn't kick in technically yet, but by the time that's why this offseason was so crucial, because now by the next time you have a chance to get free agents, his deal is going to be in effect. And if you also still have KP, you're going to have more limitations. So we'll see what they're able to do. But now that he's on this deal, the ideal window for building your best team has kind of eclipsed. It's kind of passed. And now you have to figure out how to move forward, how to build your best team. Now, crap, I think I just lost my graphic on Luka's court. I had a short story I wanted to do. Let me see if I can find it real quick here. Editing on the fly is awesome, especially when you're live. So how are you? I am well. You would think Google Images would not betray me in this way, but it has. Come on, Google. Give me something. Yes, okay, something I can work with. I have no doubt whatsoever this is going to utterly shatter the alignment of my stream. But at this point, I've already pretty much destroyed the layout, so we're just going to go with it. Let me see. Yep. All right, get ready and shatter. Oh, well, it didn't shatter, but it's itty bitty. It's so tiny. Oh, that's a impersonation I wish I could have back. All right, here you go. Luka Doncic. Ignore the backdrop. Ignore the backdrop and the topic. So, another Luka Doncic story here. This one will be real quick. Certainly not the 45 minutes roughly I just gave to the last story and then some. Luka Doncic has been remaking the courts. There was his childhood courts he grew up playing on in Slovenia. He has been remastering them. This is, I think, a really cool trend happening in basketball now, where you see guys going back, especially international players, remaking their courts, and it's kind of like they're now dedicated in their honor, which the graphic on the left might look weird, but if you spin it on its side, because it looks really confusing until you spin it on its side and then you see from a bird's eye view, oh, it's a 77. I see it now. Cool. But all I can think of as a player is playing on this court, going basket to basket would probably be really confusing just because of the strips of paint and the way that lays out, especially if you're shooting a three in that bottom left corner where the white line of the three-point line disappears into the white of the 77. I feel like that would be really tough to gauge, like if your foot's on the line in a pickup game or something. But the point is, the court does look cool. I don't know if it's necessarily the most practical application, but it does look very cool. And I think it's a great trend there. And it's got his new logo that he rolled out as well for his shoes and everything with Jordan Brand. I think it's a great thing that you're seeing these guys do, where they're going back and they're trying to kind of make a difference sort of in their community. And this is probably through his Luka Doncic Foundation, where it's giving back to the community, and it's something where you can kind of help inspire or at least provide the resources to whatever extent possible for the next generation of hoopers. Hoopers? I have never felt more white. Of basketball players coming through. In this case, Luka in Slovenia. Try to find the next Luka Doncic, maybe. Who knows? It's a very cool trend. I think it's really cool. It means a lot as well to young players growing up, because this is going to be now, if you have a court like this is now like a destination thing. Now, whether it's something you go to and play at all the time or not, that's a different matter. But in terms of just something that, if I was a kid in Slovenia, I would want to, at least a handful of times, seek out this court and play. At the very least once, seek out this court and play a pickup game or shoot around on it. Because that's just a really cool experience. It's something that adds to, not only is it of a higher quality, but it adds to kind of the special feeling of it. The thing where as you're a kid and you're dribbling around, you're always counting down the clock in your head, right? Like you're dribbling, crossing over, and in your mind you're thinking 5, 4, 3, 2. You make your move and then you try to get off a buzzer beater shot. Like those kind of things, these simulations that kids imagine and work through to try and practice and train themselves in it. Doing that, especially on a court like this, it's got to just help you visualize it even more. It's one thing if it's like some of the courts that I played on as a kid, like, you know, these public park courts where it's uneven, the concrete or asphalt, whatever, might be cracked. So you're dribbling the ball straight down and then suddenly it shoots off at a 45-degree angle out into the parking lot, and you're just like, huh. So we're just going to call that out of bounds your ball? All right. Like, it's just different. If you have a high-quality court, one made for you, and having that that kind of imagery behind it with Luka, and like, hey, I was able to do this here, and now I've made it hopefully easier for you. That's cool. That speaks to kids. That really resonates with kids. So, Freedom Roar saw the courts and they were full. I bet, dude, especially just now that it just opened, they've got to be packed. That's really cool, though. I really think that this is a trend, not even just with international players. I want to see this be a trend even with NBA players. Like, hey, example, Trae Young from Norman, Oklahoma. That's where I'm from originally. Now, he actually went to my alma mater, my high school. I didn't go to OU. But he went to Norman High School Norman High School North, or Norman North High School as it's more commonly known now. So people are going to already say I'm faking just because of that, but it's fine. I also went to Norman High School. I went to both. Don't worry about it. Don't worry about it. The point is, I think, and he's done some of this too, I think it's really cool. It doesn't have to be an outdoor court. It can be an indoor court. It could be a facility for all I care. But if you go into your community and you basically make these things, you donate to it. I don't care if they call it the Luka Doncic court if it's in Slovenia. I don't care if they call it the Trae Young court or gymnasium or whatever if it's in Oklahoma. Like, it's a really cool thing for the kids, and it's a way to kind of connect and further instill your image and your legacy within the city, especially to kids growing up. Because in the case of Trae Young, like, again, he's from Norman. With Luka, I think Slovenia is something you always are going to carry with you, because like that's your home country. You go back and you play for that national team. Trae Young might play for Team USA in the future, but it's not going to have the same kind of connection like for younger kids, because Team USA just kind of is that. You already get the all-star matchups and lineups and all of that anyway. And so I think it doesn't carry the same weight as it would for an international player representing their country, and how that continually feeds and reconnects, rebuilds that connection or solidifies it further. Here, I think kids coming up now who maybe never saw Trae Young, certainly not at Norman North High School, and probably not even at OU. They're probably looking up YouTube highlights of him at both of those places and thinking like, wow, this guy's awesome. But they they mentally assign him to Atlanta because that's the platform in which he's entering their consciousness. And so having these courts, having this, and if you're a player like Trae Young, being able to come back to it and be around in some capacity in the offseason, that's how you really build that connection further, and that's how you make a difference, I think. That's all just a long tangent of me pontificating on why I think this is an awesome trend, why I think this is a really cool thing Luka did and that other players are doing, why I encourage more of it, and why I think it makes more of a change. It's not just like a PR thing. It's not just like, oh, cool, look at me doing this thing to stroke my own ego or something like that. I think this actually can make, at a community level, change for the next generation of kids growing up wanting to be basketball players. And even the ones, maybe some of the ones who even do go on to do that. Kent Ketchum, what's good? Full episode when I get back. Love your content. Appreciate you, Kent. So, yes, I am just about out of time here. I've actually got a meeting at 1 o'clock. The free agent special does continue. I'm still fielding some offers here, but still looking at that. We'll see how that ends up going. But I plan to roll out some new content here very soon. I've already been writing things out. You're going to see content from me you have never seen before. I've already kind of teased it a little bit once, but some really cool stuff is coming down the pike. I promise you that. So be on the lookout. The NBA season, believe it or not, is not far away. We're like 41 days away from the start of the NBA season again. And it's going to be very interesting to see what the new era Mavericks look like. I would just like to see them hurry up and get the damn rebrand over with that Mark Cuban's been talking about since Dirk retired. I want to see what the new rebranded Mavericks looks like because it's a new era anyway. We might as well slap a new logo on it that doesn't look like it was made in 2000. Oh, wait, it was. Anyway, that's all my time, guys. Thank you so much for watching. Like the video, drop a comment below, subscribe to the Dallas Prospect, and until next time, remember, every legend was once a prospect. Peace! Check out the patrons and YouTube members now represented at the end of every. Count them every. Why would you count them every? That makes no sense. Oh God, I'm messing it up. Featured at the end of every video and live stream moving forward. Salute.